Right, and we are live on YouTube, and I'll let everybody in. Good evening, everybody. If you're just joining us, this is the Montgomery County Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. We've just opened our doors, so we'll let everybody in. It takes a few minutes. Welcome. Good evening. If you're just joining us, this is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. Doors have just opened. Takes a few minutes. Welcome, everybody. We like to wait a couple minutes until we hit a magic number. We're not quite there yet. Thanks for your patience. The magic number, by the way, is of the executive director to the Renters Alliance, an entire choice here. So at my discretion. And it's right at either 7:03 or 21, whichever comes first. All right, it's 21. So good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Losack. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. Let's do a couple of house cleaning things first. First of all, if you have any questions or concerns, please put them in the chat. Our staff will be monitoring the chat as we go. We are live on YouTube. I know some of you have some frustrations and concerns, but we ask that at all times your questions be civil and respectful of our panelists. This evening, we're going to discuss some of the basic things having to do with renters' rights and some new information, or at least updated information on what's important to renters. So we have with us tonight the Renters Alliance staff. Our first senior outreach coordinator and brand new, Jackie Mashinya, is with us. Our outreach director, David Mullins, outreach coordinators, Tim Huang and Emily Towie, Pat Beckham as well. And also, I want to give a special shout out and thanks to Max Wilberg, who doesn't have his camera on for some reason, probably because he's eating a hot dog. But he has been with us for a year with Governor Westmore's service year. And we have been very lucky to have him with us because there he is. Go ahead, hide the hot dog. He has worked very hard helping us set up events and learning everything you need. He's just out of high school. Max, where did you graduate from high school?
Clarksburg High School in Montgomery County.
Clarksburg High School. So, doing some important service work for us and getting ready to go to college after hopefully a well-earned summer rest. But we want to say thank you to Max Wilberg for his work. And that also thank you to Governor Westmore and to the Service Year program that allows us to have an extra pair of hands to do a lot of our outreach work. You know, We have been in over 150 apartment communities over the course of the last 10 or 11 months. And that is, despite our tremendous brains in this operation, it also requires some legwork. And that means going door to door, putting literature under people's doors, going to hundreds of people who have received, unfortunately, eviction notices, and making sure that they have information about what available resources there are. We've been to scores of community events, outdoors and indoors, that require setting up tables and tents and carrying information and so on. And Max has been very important to us, especially to me as I'm getting older. So we really appreciate your work. Thanks, Max. So our special panelists tonight joining us, we have representatives from the Office of Rent Stabilization from the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. And we have Kashamba Williams, a manager with the Code Enforcement Department. I'll let Paulina and Sharon introduce themselves when they come on. But tonight we also expected to have Nicole Katravanos, the manager of the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, but she is not feeling poorly, which is a good reminder to all of us that even though I don't know if she has COVID or not, but I do know that there are viruses that are still out there, and we are seeing it. So a reminder for all of us to be careful. I had a terrible summer flu last summer, and so it doesn't matter what time of the year it is, that stuff is still around and we still have to be careful. So with that, I believe first up is code enforcement. And so I'll turn this over to Kashamba Williams, also known as Kay. Welcome, Kay.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. And here to represent a DHCA with Housing Code Enforcement to give some information and hopefully answer questions that anyone may have. So I thank you, and thanks to all the rest of the panelists as well that are here to present. So let's just talk a little bit about DHCA and our mission. So we work to preserve and increase the supply of affordable housing, maintaining existing housing in safe and sanitary condition, preserving the safety and quality of residential and commercial areas, ensuring fair and equitable relations between landlords and tenants. And we also support the success of common ownership communities, all with the focus of reducing racial inequities and the climate change impacts. So we do that through a number of different departments. So as you see, rent stabilization is here tonight. I know that you had the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs to come. These are all under some of the umbrellas of our leadership and our director, Scott Bruton, which includes rental housing, housing development, finance and administration, which licensing falls under as well, and community development. So there are a number of questions that you've asked me to speak on tonight, and I will do that. And so one of the questions was the notice of inspection requirements. What are the notice of inspection requirements for landlords, and what can tenants expect? So landlords are required to give a 72-hour notice to provide access for an inspection. That, of course, is contingent upon if it's an emergency. If it's an emergency, then rules do not apply to that. No notification is necessary if they need to address any emergencies. For a county inspection, which is one of the mandated inspections, they do need to give the 72-hour notice prior to us conducting any inspection. And you can stop me at any time, Matt, if there are questions. Okay. So can a tenant refuse to allow someone to enter their apartment? Can they do that? If adequate notice is not given, you have the right to say no. You have the right to say, I need official notification of you coming into my home. Now, again, if it's an emergency, that does not apply. So in emergency situations, they have the right, the landlord has a right to come in to address any emergencies. Now, the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs is going to deal with any questions that you have regarding that, or you can open up an investigation with them because that's more lease compliance. Anything that's dealing with maintenance, that's housing code enforcement. We are there strictly to make sure that your house meets the um, simple compliance regulations for the county.
Okay, can I ask a couple questions about that? Because this comes up a lot. So for one thing, when you all are doing an inspection of an apartment community, which can be, I think, a percentage, 10 or 25%, 50%, or 100%.
Mhm.
And it can also be on demand by an individual tenant who might request an inspection of some sort. Under those circumstances, say the routine circumstances, what kind of notice can a tenant expect, and how does that notice come to them?
So it has to be a 72-hour notice, and they can have it emailed. They can post it within the building. They can send it via mail. They can post it on the doors. They just need to have that notification, and they can take pictures to show where they posted on the individual door of the tenant. So they also, most properties post in common areas too, but the tenants always get an individual notice,
So
which
does the
I
no-
should say should always get an
so
individual.
it comes as a postcard from you all sometime, or is it from management?
So I'm glad that you brought that up, Matt. So yes, housing, we send postcards to the residents to let them know there is an upcoming inspection, and you can expect to receive some notification that we're coming to do an inspection of your property. The property management company or the owners, then they send a notice out to the tenants, letting them know that we're going to be entering their units, but it should be given within 72 hours of the inspection, or it could be a bit sooner.
Now, the other part of that is that they receive the notice and the inspection takes place, but oftentimes, because the inspector can't get into an apartment without staff, does the tenant have to allow the staff to enter with the inspector, or do they have the option to say, I only want the inspector to enter?
They have the option to say, I only want the inspector to come in. The maintenance personnel can stand outside while we conduct the inspection.
Because sometimes we see the property manager wanting to go too, and some tenants are intimidated and don't want to say what they want to say to the inspector about what's broken because they're afraid of retaliation. So thank you for that.
Sure. Okay. So the next was, do tenants have a right to have the apartment painted every 5 years? So for code enforcement, we particularly come in and we're uncertain whether or not the tenant has been there for 5 years, 10 years. However, if there's some compromise to that chip and peel and paint or holes in the wall, we're going to note that. And so if a tenant is saying, I have been here over 5 years and I want my unit painted, but the paint is in good condition, and we don't find a violation, then we're not going to note a violation, but they can still request to have their unit painted, just normal wear and tear. Now, if, let's say, the property management company says no, then they would then contact MC 311 so that they can open an investigation with the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs, because our Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs is going to step in to help them with that.
Yeah, let me just go back real quick, Kay, if I may. There's a
Sure.
question that came in that from Tony that says we're under the impression that the property has 24 hours. So I think we just need to distinguish
Yeah.
between a code inspection and a property inspection. So the property can come in either for maintenance or for an inspection within reason, but they have to give at least 24
24
hours
hours.
notice. An
Correct.
inspection from the county requires 72 hours
At
notice.
least
Is that
72
correct?
hours.
Yeah. So that's a very big deal. And I also want to throw something in about that too, so people understand a distinction. You have a reasonable right to say, hey, look, the property inspection, if the property manager wants to come in and it's an inconvenient time, you could say, look, I want to negotiate a time when I'm going to be at home, or some other more reasonable negotiation. Uh, and also, we've seen where sometimes people feel like the property manager or maintenance is going to come in and take photographs. That may not be appropriate either, and may be a violation of your privacy rights. Kay, can you address any of that, or is that more of an Ulta thing?
It is, but I will tell you this, if we go into a unit and we find that there are violations, we are going to take pictures of the violation so that
Sure.
we validate that.
Just making a distinction between taking a photograph or video of your entire apartment versus mold or some other appliance that may be broken or something like that that's relevant, directly relevant to the inspection.
Hmm.
And one other thing about entering your apartment, it's still your private space. And so if somebody wants to come in and you don't want them to come in, you can prevent them to coming in, except in an emergency. But if they've given you legitimate notice and you do that, they can then pursue an eviction based on breach of lease. So just keep that in mind. It's still your private space. Obviously, police and fire or somebody needs to get in an emergency, that's going to be difficult to stop. But if somebody wants to come into your apartment and you don't want them in, if you have a legitimate reason to say no, you can prevent them from coming in. And if they push their way in, they are in fact trespassing. But if you don't have a good reason, they could evict you for saying, hey, look, we gave you notice, we're coming in good faith. We needed to look at something, we needed to do some maintenance. We gave you a proper notice and you said no. They could go after you for breach of lease. But we don't want people to think that they're living in a dormitory. They're living in their private homes and they pay rent for that purpose. Okay.
Sure. All right. So another concern was the right to AC. So I believe June 1st, 2020 went into effect Bill 2419 regarding the AC bill and the right for tenants to have AC. So what does that particularly mean? What we do is we monitor code compliance from June 1st to September 30th to ensure that tenants' units are not above 80 degrees. And I know that may sound high, that degrees, but that is the regulation. So if we go in and we find that it is 80 degrees or more, then the owner or the management company is responsible for ensuring that the HVAC system, central air, or they have at least minimum portable AC units to accommodate the units so that it's not meeting that threshold.
Okay, did you just say when it ends to it's from June 1st till when?
September the 30th.
September the 30th. The Renters Alliance was very active in getting that legislation passed, and I can tell you, given global warming, we are looking at extending that time because it may be necessary. And obviously, good landlords will turn it on when it becomes necessary and turn it off when it starts getting cold. So hopefully, there's some good landlords out there.
Okay. So lastly, the window guards. So that was Bill 5120, and that went into effect January 1, 2022. So the window guards, if there is a child 10 or younger in a unit that's above ground, the property is responsible for ensuring that unit has window guards. And tenants can also, whether they have a child in their 10 or younger, they can also request to have window guards in their homes.
So that's a very important piece of legislation. I'm sure that some of you heard of the recent case of the child that fell 15 stories at the Enclave. It wasn't because of the lack of window guards, unfortunately. They went out onto the balcony. But anybody who has children who are young, and I have two staff that have very young children, I think they would agree that if you turn your back on them for a few minutes, you might be in trouble. And so having window guards can be very important to people with young children who live in high-rise apartment buildings. Do we have any questions for Kashamba Williams, the manager at Code Enforcement?
Yes, Kay,
Yes,
I have
go ahead.
two questions for you about the window guards. If a tenant does not have any children and window guards have been installed, are they allowed to request the window guards be removed?
Yes.
And is management required to honor that request, or it's just you can ask and see what they say?
Now, that is something you particularly probably want to talk to Alta about, the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs. We are dealing with strictly maintenance compliance. So if they do have a child in their 10 or younger, they have to have them. They can request if they don't have children to have them removed. Now,
And
the the after effect, again, is probably more of landlord tenant.
Okay, if the property manager says no, we need to keep them up, someone should direct that to Ulta. Got it. And then we had a question in the chat that says this is a president of their tenants association in their building. They've helped connect code enforcement with for themselves and with some other tenants in the association. Does code enforcement have to go through property management for an inspection, or can you inspect tenant complaints directly as code enforcement with the tenant's permission? So do you need to contact the property management to schedule something, or could you just come to the tenant who filed that complaint?
So there's two parts to this. We will contact management when we have a mandated inspection. Any
Okay.
complaint cases, we're going to deal directly and schedule it with the tenant that has made the official complaint.
Okay, so you don't have to communicate
No.
with property management if it's
We
tenant-based
don't.
complaint.
We don't to schedule the inspection to come. Now, we do have communication with management afterwards if there are violations found, of course. We
Mhm.
may go over to the management office and let them know. And we were on your property. We found some violations. We're going to follow up with the notice of violation that's to come.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you, Kay.
Hey, are you able to address reporting requirements on e-properties?
I am not, but I wanted to back up just for a second, Matt. So Tamala Robinson is our manager for code enforcement. I work under her direction. I am one of the program managers that supervises the multifamily team, and I'm one of 4.
I do know, and perhaps Paulina or Sharon might know as well, coming from DHCA, but in our experience, code inspections, Ulta complaints, licensing information is supposed to be available on the eProperties database. And that is a public-facing database. Perhaps one of my staff can put up the link to eProperties. And it has always been a bit of a problematic database, even though it's a very useful database. For example, you could put in Cold Spring Plaza as the name of your community, and it might not come up unless you put just Cold Spring or Cold Spring. Or if you put up the address and not put in the full name, it might come up in different ways. So it's always been a little bit temperamental in that respect. However, when it's working to the fullest, you should be able to see what code complaints have been filed, what broad code reports, if there's a 100% inspection or 50% inspection, the full report should be there, and Ulta complaints should be there, and their status, and whatever if there's been a resolution. That's the way it's supposed to work, and in many cases it does. So I would encourage people to take advantage of tracking those cases. Judy, as far as having to file an MPIA, I suppose it depends if you want to see the full report. But a lot of what code does and what Ulta does, and I'm not sure whether rent stabilization is up on eProperties yet, but it's supposed to be public facing. Okay, any other questions for Ms. Kay Williams?
Yeah, there's a question about a unit that has mice. She said the inspector came out and gave the management notice to resolve. However, it's a building-wide infestation. Yeah, and they were saying because it's an HOC building that it might take years to resolve. So
HOA, it's a condo with a HOA.
Oh, HOA, sorry. Yeah, HOA. And so they I guess they want to know if they can request a rent reduction because of that.
So anything that deals with rent reduction is the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs. In terms of making sure that the unit the mice or rodents are eliminated for the units, the code inspector is going to follow through until that happens. So there will be a notice of violation, but we will follow up to ensure that treatment is done, that we receive the pet service reports, that that the unit is meeting the basic necessities, has the basic necessities to be able to get this taken care of.
And
Okay, when Berman in general comes up frequently, as you know,
Yes.
We have seen sometimes pushback from some property managers who will say, you're the reason why you have bed bugs, or you're the reason why you have mice or rats or cockroaches. Um, is there a circumstance when the property manager can charge the tenant for the extermination?
So let's just back up for just a second because housekeeping does play an important role in ensuring that the elimination of the rodents or pests is taken care of. So if we go into a unit and we do see that there is a housekeeping concern, we will let the tenant know this potentially is contributing to the cause of this pest service infestation. So we're going to work with the tenant, but at the same time, the tenant will receive a housekeeping notice from us to let them know, you need to take care of certain things in order to help to eliminate this. We will also going to still give the management company a notice of violation. Now, in terms of what a management company can do, if a tenant is continuing to refuse treatment or is not being prepared, then again, that's something that they want to, if the management office does that and puts the charges on their account, they want to talk to Alta about that because they'll investigate the complaint. So the key is making sure that you're being cooperative and you're helping so that you can get this eliminated.
But under general circumstances, it is the landlord that is responsible for the extermination of vermin. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And there was a rule of thumb, and I don't know whether this is the law or not, but if it were one apartment in a 15-story, 400-unit place that had bed bugs, then the property manager could say, you're the only one. Maybe you're the only one who brought them here. But if we could show that there were multiple apartments that had bed bugs, there would be no way for the property management or the landlord to blame one tenant. And then that would make it substantiate the need for their responsibility. Is that a rule of thumb, or does that make any difference?
No, what should happen is if there is a unit that potentially is saying that they have bed bugs, they're going to have the pest service company to come to investigate to see if they do have bed bugs. They're going to do initial inspection. However, management, what they should do is when we will recommend that they go to the unit side by side, up and down, just to ensure that those units are not affected. So that's what we're going to request.
Okay. Other questions for Kay Williams, folks?
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
go ahead, Tim. Go ahead, Tim.
Oh, just a follow-up. So if there is vermin in the building itself, can someone call and make a complaint to address that issue?
Yes.
Okay.
We inspect common areas as well.
Kay, can you just remind everybody that that code, the role of code enforcement, which is mostly maintenance and vermin, is that correct?
We do building exterior. So there's different parts of housing code enforcement inspectors. So we have different groups. We have groups that deal specifically with single family, where they do exterior complaints, neighbor complaints, lighting complaints, hoarding complaints. You
Ooh.
have the multifamily team. The multifamily, we inspect all multifamily properties. Those are the mandated inspections. This is where you hear about troubled, at risk, compliant properties. We do, again, I'm not sure if I said complaint cases. We do exteriors, common areas too. Then we have a Tacoma Park team that inspects Tacoma Park. So, I mean, we do FDA inspections, that's for foster care. We do compliance checks. I mean, there are a number of inspections that we cover. So,
I just wanted to distinguish you from
yeah.
Alta or rent
Oh,
stabilization,
yes.
in that the kinds of violations that you're dealing with have to do with, certainly for renters and multifamily, would be maintenance issues, vermin issues, in the common area, exterior and inside apartment buildings. Is that apartments? Is that fair coverage?
That is fair to say, and most times residents have distinguish between maintenance, code enforcement, and Alta. So oftentimes, they come to us with a complaint, and it's a landlord tenant complaint, and I say, well, we deal strictly with maintenance, and sometimes it's hard to distinguish that. So it's just specifically maintenance compliance for housing code enforcement.
And how would you recommend a tenant seek your services? What are the steps a tenant should take if they see that they have a maintenance problem or a vermin problem or whatever that comes under your authority?
So the first thing you should do is talk to your landlord. Let your landlord know and give them an opportunity to correct any violations that you have in your home. Even if they don't come out or they do come out, you still have the right to contact MC 311, that's Montgomery County, and file a complaint with code enforcement. You can do that by calling, and then you can do that online by actually putting in a complaint.
Okay, and somebody on my staff, can you put that link to the code enforcement complaint in the chat? And thank you very much, Kay. You can feel free to answer any questions in the chat that you see or any concerns that are being raised. But we are going to move on now to rent stabilization and to Paulina Melvin and Sharon Wilkerson, the program manager for rent stabilization, who will give us a rundown, not on the whole program, but particularly on those fees that keep coming up that people aren't sure whether they're allowed or not allowed. And for that matter, anything else that Sharon and Paulina want to talk about. So welcome, ladies.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Give me one moment. I'll share my screen. Okay.
And while Sharon will be giving presentation, I will be in the chat room answering any questions. So please feel free to put any questions in the chat. I'll try to keep up.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt, and everyone from Renters Alliance for having us. Thank you, Kay, for that introduction and giving an intro to our department. Again, my name is Sharon Wilkerson. I'm the program manager for the Office of Rent Stabilization. And my manager, Paulina Melvin, is here today as well. She'll be answering questions in the chat. So we're just going to do a little quick overview where, as Matt said, we're not going to go over everything, but I at least wanted to give you all a little introduction so we can go ahead and get started. So rent stabilization is a policy that some local governments and states have that created so that they can limit the amount landlords are able to increase their rents. Montgomery County, we passed our own rent stabilization law, and regulations went into effect on July 23rd of 2004. So we're coming up on just a full year in about a month or so. So among all these other things, as I said, one of the main purposes is to govern how much landlords can increase rents each year. We also set the allowable fees that a landlord can charge and the allowable fee increase for each year. Additionally, if you live in a property that's been deemed troubled or at risk, meaning that they have some of those code violations, a significant amount of those code violations that Kay already went over, your landlord is not permitted to increase the rent by any amount while they have those designations. We also offer certain circumstances for landlords to increase rent above the allowable increase. That's for if they do in things such as like large scale capital improvements or a large scale type of substantial renovation. And there are also certain properties that are exempt. So we'll get into a little bit of that, not everything today. So just generally, each March we set the annual rent increase. We set it each year. It's a calculation. So it is the consumer price index, a number that's determined each year, plus 3% or 6%. So whichever is lower. This year, currently, the limit applies from July 1st to June 3rd of the following year. So since we're not to July 1st yet, the current CPIU is 3.3. So the current allowable rent increase is 6%. So starting July 1st of this year, the CPIU is 2.7, so the maximum rent increase allowance will actually drop to 5.7%. So as with any rent increase, the rent increase notices have to be delivered in writing and delivered either through U.S. mail or in person with a signed receipt, and it must be sent with at least 90 days before the increase goes into effect. It must contain a 2-year renewal offer, and each rent increase must include the current rent, new rent, the percentage of increase, the date of the effective date of the increase, and a statement informing you that the tenant has the right to ask DHCA to review any increase that you all feel is excessive. So as I previously mentioned, not all rental units in Montgomery County fall under rent stabilization. Here we have a full list of the types of properties that are exempt. So you'll see some of them are the assisted living facilities, nursing homes, the dorms, the Airbnbs, accessory ADUs, those are also exempt. One that I did want to touch on is units that are subject to a regulatory agreement with a government agency that restrict the unit to low and moderate income tenants. So that would be any income restricted unit, meaning that you have to meet a certain threshold in order to live there. So those would be like LIHTC units, any AMI restricted units. This does not apply to tenant-based programs. So if you have a voucher yourself, and you take it to move into a regular market rate unit, then that one that there is a chance that one may be subject to rent stabilization. So just a little quick comparison about the differences between a regulated and exempt unit. So you'll see here, I'll briefly go over it again. The rent increase for regulated units is limited to the allowable increase that we publish each year. You may only increase rent on a unit when you are signing a new lease or a lease renewal. Rent may only be increased for that unit once every 12 months. No mid-lease increases are allowed. So we have an example here. So say there's a unit in the property and the rent was increased on January 1st. The tenant moves out. They just moved out on June 2nd. The landlord, even though the tenant is moving out, the landlord still must wait a full 12 months before increasing the rent. So even if a new tenant moves in on June 3rd or August 3rd or any time until January 1st of the following year, they must have the same rent. They cannot increase until January 1st of the following year. Now, if you live in a regulated unit and you have a multi-year lease, the rent increase applies to the first year, only to the first year, and you must have the same rent for the entirety of that lease term. So if you sign a 2-year lease, and if you live in a regulated unit and you sign a multi-year lease, you'll have the same rent for that whole lease term. If you sign a 2-year lease, you'll have the same rent for 2 years. Now, on the other side, we have the exempt units. So we do not regulate the amount by that landlords increase the rent for exempt units. We do, however, recommend that they stay within the voluntary rent guidelines. Those are also available on our website and published each year. Similar to an exempt unit, you may only increase the rent when signing a new lease or at a lease renewal. However, in an exempt unit, a tenant's rent may only be increased once every 12 months. But the landlord may increase the rent for a new lease. So we have another example, but just a different situation. So in an exempt unit, the rent was increased on January 1st of this year. A tenant moves out at the end of their lease on June 2nd. Because this is an exempt unit, the landlord is allowed to increase the rent for that unit by any amount when a new tenant decides to move in. For exempt units, no mid-lease increases are allowed unless it is a mid-year lease. So if you live in an exempt unit and you do sign a 2 or multi-year lease, it is possible that your rent can increase after the first year. So now we'll get into fees. So if you live in a regulated unit, our regulation limits the type of fees and the amounts a landlord can charge. So here we have, you'll see here we have the list of the type of fees that are regulated for rent stabilized units. And so we have 2 columns here. So the middle column is the current fees as of today. And since we know that July 1st is coming up soon, some of our fees are allowed an annual increase based on the CPI. So I have here on the far right column, these will be the new fees as of July 1st. So not all of them are increasing. Some of them are staying the same, but you'll see here we have the pet fee, the lockout fee, and the parking fees are allowed a CPI increase. So I do want to touch on some of the fees in general. So for example, the pet fee, as of right now, landlords are permitted to charge a $300 refundable pet deposit and up to $25 per pet per month. The pet deposit, again, is refundable minus any pet-related damages and is expected to return at the end of your lease. For secure storage, so the landlord is not allowed to charge a fee for any storage located within, attached to, or associated with your unit. So, you know, some units have a balcony and they sometimes have those storage units or those storage closets on the outside. That would be a storage that's already associated with your unit, so your landlord wouldn't be able to charge an extra fee for that. So there are a few exceptions. So a landlord may charge fees for optional services, and these will be services that the tenant chooses to enroll in. These fees are not regulated. We don't put a limit on those. Examples of those types of fees could be, you know, access to a dog park or a pet spa at some of the newer properties, swimming pool pass or swimming pool access or gym membership. But with these optional fees, it's important to know that a landlord may not charge for any service that impacts the entire community. And a landlord may not charge a fee for any service required to ensure unit access, maintenance, or lease compliance. So an example of unit access would be for the key fobs. Some of the apartment buildings in the area have transitioned from the traditional lock and key to the electronic key fob, and as such have begun charging a tech fee or a fob fee. Those types of fees are no longer permitted, just off the basis of you cannot charge someone to gain access to a unit for which they're already paying rent for. An example of a maintenance would be the regular pest fee. So there are some we have seen some properties where they charge, you know, anywhere from $8 to $12 per month for the regular pest maintenance. So that's no longer permitted because that would be the maintenance of the property. And so I know, Kay, we just had a little bit discussion about the differences between that. So, you know, if it's something where it's particular to your unit, again, they know that it's yours, there may be a fee associated with that. But if this is a regular thing that they're doing across the board to everyone's unit, you know, once a month, every 3 months or something like that, then that's not a charge that the landlords are able to pass off to the tenants. An example of lease compliance. Now, this would pertain to being able to pay your rent. Again, the example here would be you must have an option to pay your rent that does not have a fee. You know, so it's okay. You know, you know, you can pay your rent online, but sometimes that comes with a small $2 or $3 convenience fee, which is permitted. However, there still has to be a free option. You know, there may be a convenience fee to pay online, but there is no fee for you to drop that cashier's check to the rent office and get a paper receipt back. So the most convenient option might have a fee, but there must always still be a free option available for you to pay your rent. So as far as implementation, new fees may not be charged during the lease term unless they are for one of the optional services that the tenant chooses to enroll into. Fees may be increased only once every 12 months and also require a written day notice like the rent increases. And this last bit is so once regulations went into effect, some landlords tried to implement new fees. There was a period of time where the law was passed before regulations went into effect. And so some landlords tried to impose new fees, and we offered a grace period. However, if you have found that since the regulations went into effect after July 23rd and your landlord has imposed a new fee that is no longer permitted, it must be removed, and they must refund that money, any money that you have already paid.
Sharon, just to make sure we're clear on that, if a landlord were charging a fee before last July 23rd.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. It was after. My apologies.
Yeah.
So if a fee was implemented after July 23rd, that is over the regulation limits, then it must be removed, and anything that was paid must be refunded. We did have a 90-day grace period, but that expired back in October of last year.
So if they charged a fee prior to July 23rd of last year, that is no longer legal, is it grandfathered in, or do they have to remove that fee?
They have to remove it. Paulina, please correct me if I'm wrong. Now, this would be something if it's like the pest fee and stuff, they would have to remove that.
I'm sorry, I was answering questions in the chat. The question was if they implemented the fee after July 23rd or before July 23rd?
Before the law came into effect, which was last summer, July 23rd. If they had charged a fee that is not legal under the current rent stabilization program, if they had charged it before, is it grandfathered in, or does it become an illegal fee that they must remove as of July 23rd of last summer?
It becomes an illegal fee that they must remove. So if they're started to charge I'm trying to think one of the fees, like gym membership fee, or any of the other fees that we do not have
amenity
listed.
fee.
The amenity fee, thank you. The amenity fee, they have to stop charging that now. So they do not refund if they were charging up until October 21st, but if they've been charging it since October 21st, they do all refund.
Sharon, could you just remind us, if you didn't do it already, of who is exempt from this program?
Oh, of course. Here. So here's this is a list of units exempt from rent stabilization.
So keep that in mind. If your property is less than 23 years old, if it's 22 years old, you've got one more year. If it's brand new, you have 23 years of exemption. If you're a small landlord, or someone put in the chat, I think, if you're renting a room or whatever, you're not covered. Is it 2 or 6?
Yeah. Oh, excuse me. So, my apologies. So it would be 2 or fewer. So, and the emphasis here would be a unit owned by a natural person. So this is where e-property or property like, Maryland Property Search comes in handy. So if you live in an apartment and this would be if you have a small landlord, your landlord owns their own home and they own your unit as a rental property and one other, those would be 2 or fewer. So they would be exempt from rent stabilization. But the key here would be those units would have to be owned under the same name as your landlord. So say your landlord is John Smith. If he owns your rental unit and he owns it as John Smith, the person, then it would be exempt. Then it would be exempt from rent stabilization. However, if John Smith owned his home that he lived in, and then had a rental property, but decided to file that rental property under John Smith, the LLC, or JS Properties LLC, they would be under rent stabilization because that's a business entity and not a natural person or a trust.
And the other piece of bad news for those who are not covered by this program is that the city of Gaithersburg and the city of Rockville are independent municipalities and do not fall under Montgomery County Chapter 29. They have their own. Now, much of their laws are similar to Chapter 29, but one of the laws of rent stabilization does not apply to Gaithersburg or the city of Rockville, even though I can tell you proudly that the Renters Alliance is working very hard with community members in both of those cities to get rent stabilization passed. But that is an issue for the Gaithersburg Council and Mayor and the Rockville City Council and Mayor. Tacoma Park does have its own rent stabilization program, but it too is also an independent municipality like Gaithersburg and Rockville. But they do smartly have a contract with Montgomery County for code enforcement, as Kay had mentioned before. So code enforcement issues in Tacoma Park are under the same circumstances as the rest of the county. Do we have questions for Sharon Wilkerson or Paulina Melvin?
Yes, Sharon, I had a question about the refunds for example, for the pest control fee. So if a property had been charging a pest control fee prior to July 23rd of last year and continued to charge it to February of this year, and it's a regulated unit. Well, I guess I have two questions. Even if it's not a regulated, if it is a regulated unit, are the refunds required to go back to October, back to July, or back to when they first started charging that fee?
I believe they would go back until October because before July, there was no regulation. So we weren't allowed to, we can't ask them to refund that because they were still allowed.
Sure.
And then regulation went into effect July, but we did allow a 90-day grace period of whatever you need to do with your systems or whatever accounting you need to do to remove this. So it would be from October up until February, I think it was you said.
Okay.
Or till now, as you're saying.
Okay, that makes sense. And then part two to that is, are that like I think you had it on a couple slides ahead about, like fees that are allowed, fees that aren't allowed. So for like a pest control fee, that's a fee that, it's maintenance for the entire building.
Yeah.
Is that still allowed in an exempt unit, or does this fee rule only apply to regulated units?
As of now, these only apply to regulated units.
Okay, so an exempt unit could still be charging pest control fees on a monthly basis.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? This one is for Kay, circling back to code. That's in the Q&A, though we asked folks to put it in the chat if you would, but let me read this. The maintenance guy ordered a wrong part for my stove, which caused a fire incident. I believe investigation is still ongoing, but apartment management was trying to force me to pay for damages as a result of the fire because it occurred in my apartment. Meanwhile, fire marshal is yet to interview me about the fire. Management was claiming it was a grease fire, which it is not. I am not ready to pay for what is not my fault. What should I do to avoid being evicted? I'm not sure that the grease fire makes it an eviction, but I just learned the maintenance guy stopped working for the landlord. So there's some confusion about what to do. But Kay, maybe you could address, first of all, what this person should do to follow up. And also, can you describe a little bit about repair and deduct and how that works?
So that's going to be more for the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs. I apologize. I will say if the stove is not operable, you can contact Code Enforcement MC311 and we can have Code Enforcement inspector come to investigate.
Right,
It seems
but
like
if
it's
the
more so fees, yeah.
But if the landlord is claiming something that you don't believe, you can file a complaint also with the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs to get them to mediate between you and the landlord. But people a law that the Renters Alliance worked very hard to get passed years ago, because it used to be that if a property manager or landlord was not making a repair, that you could put your rent into escrow, but that would have meant going to court. So we tried to make that a little bit easier by working through code. Can you address that, Kay?
Unfortunately, I cannot.
All right, well, let me just describe what it is. If you have a maintenance issue and code has come and cited the property and said, you got to repair this, and they don't, then you can request of code to approve that the tenant can pay for it themselves and deduct it from the rent, but that up to 1 month's rent only. So if it's a small repair like a stove or something, the tenant can do them themselves. But it's very, very important that first, code has cited the management. Second, that code approves the deduction from the rent to pay for the maintenance issue. So that is a process that's a little bit easier than having to go to court and ask for a rent escrow. But yes, if you think that it's something where the property management is accusing you of something you didn't do, or has made an assessment in order to avoid taking care of the maintenance themselves, it seems that landlord-tenant might help in that mediation. And of course, you can contact us too, and we can help guide you through that. There was another question someplace. Anything else for rent stabilization or code? Wow, you guys must have done a great job. All right, then. Then we're going to take over and welcome Josh Fisher, our treasurer of our board of directors.
Thank
Keeps
you.
track of us to make sure we're spending the money the right way.
Good evening, everybody. Sorry.
Good evening, Josh. We're going to go through some of the things that landlord-tenant talks about. As I say, Nicole Catravanos, the manager, is not feeling well, so we're going to do our best from the Renters Alliance standpoint. And I believe the first issue was the mission of the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs. They're the ones who are responsible for enforcing your rights as a tenant and for the lease provisions. So if you find that you're not being treated correctly by the property management, that your rights are being violated in some way, you want to form a tenants association and they're not letting you, you find that there's a provision in your lease that is illegal or unenforceable, or some other issue between you and property staff or the landlord, that becomes an issue for the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs. But just like code, we urge you to go to property management or the landlord first and see if you can work it out. If you find that you've had an excessive rent increase or some other issue about behavior in the building, try to work it out with the property manager or the landlord first. If you're unsuccessful, and especially if you think the property manager or the landlord is being purposely unhelpful, then it's time to file a complaint with the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs. The Renters Alliance was created in part to help guide you through that process. And so we urge you, if you're not sure, give us a call or send us an email. And we have a long experience in helping you decide whether or not this is something to file with the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, or to file with code enforcement, or to file with rent stabilization, and get you ready to do it and help you to do it correctly. And then also to help guide you through it to see that you get the services and enforcement you're entitled to. So that's what the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs does. And let me turn it over now to Emily to talk about the rights of tenants to organize tenants associations.
Sure. So there are a couple of basic tenant organizing rights, some of which the Renters Alliance help to make sure that tenants are afforded these rights. Tenants have the right to self-organization, which means that they can form tenants associations with representatives of their own choosing, which could include inviting the Renters Alliance to come to a meeting to help get your neighbors started with their tenants association. And tenants also have the right to refrain from any such activity. Although we always encourage people to join a tenants association, you have the right to not join, even if your building is getting organized. Tenant associations have the right to if your building has a community room on site, like there's a lounge, there's a community room on site, tenants are allowed to have the room once a month free of charge for a tenant organizing meeting. If you want to have a second or third meeting, the building is allowed to charge you, but they can't charge you more because it's a tenants association meeting. They have to charge you the same rate as if you were booking a birthday party or something like that. But the first of the month should be free. Now, if there's not a community room on site, then the building's not required to provide you, like, to pay for a library room down the street or a clubhouse down the street. It's only if the building already had a community room. The next one, this is a big one, is that tenant associations have the right to distribute freely and post in centrally located areas of the building as long as the origin of literature is properly identified. So what does that mean? So if tenant association is planning on having a meeting, they are allowed to distribute invitations door to door, inviting all their neighbors to come out and post them in the common areas that management also posts their notices. So think the elevators where you see management saying they have happy hour coming up. You can put tenants association meeting coming up next Tuesday. Just be sure you don't cover up any of management's notices, like the elevator certification or fire safety information. Any of their notices, you can't take them down to put up your tenant association thing, but it can be right next to it. The only requirement there is that the origin of the literature is identified. So it has to say, this apartment's tenants association. And we would suggest that tenant associations flyer reasonably, if there's a meeting next week, probably shouldn't flyer every day until then on everyone's doors, because that can be a bit excessive. But putting out information, invitations, trying to gather interest for tenants association, that is all protected under the law. And I'm also going to post a link to the law afterwards so people can check it out for themselves if they want a reference. And it's a four-part section. The last part is that tenant associations can file complaints under this chapter, and this is chapter 29, section 33. If they've been represented, so like a tenant association can file a complaint on behalf of the tenants association if they're authorized to do so. Now, if any of these rights have been violated, let's say your flyers are being taken down, or you tried to reserve the room for a tenants association meeting and it's the first one of the month and they said it's going to be $250. Or they see you having a tenants association meeting, they say you're not allowed to do that. That's, we don't allow tenants associations here at our building. If any of that were to happen, first you can contact the Renters Alliance, but that can also be a landlord tenant complaint. That wouldn't be code, because that would be maintenance, and this wouldn't be rent stabilization. This would be Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs complaint. But you can also let us know. And in that same regard, if you want to start a tenants association, please reach out to us. Or maybe your building had one a couple years ago, but people have kind of fallen off and the leaders moved out. But you want to get together with your neighbors and make sure everyone knows their rights, knows their resources, and also to build community and get to know your neighbors. Please reach out to us. We love helping folks start tenants associations. And we can, deliver something similar to this, like a know your rights, to bring people out, make sure they all know what their rights are. And Tim put that section in the chat. So please reach out if you have any questions about those rights.
Thanks, Emily. All right, David, how do we get out of a lease if suddenly we need to break the lease?
Well, luckily, the same chapter, 29, has two sections that govern what needs to be in a lease, what's also prohibited from being in a written lease. And so in the contents of lease section, if you have a written lease in Montgomery County, it should include a list of events, of things that can happen that would allow you to break the lease early with 30 days notice, and then it would allow for an additional fee that cannot be more than 1 month's rent. So there will be the lease will say if you're going to terminate early, there's a large termination fee, and then this list would be the things that would exempt you from that fee, would allow you to give only 30 days notice, and then reduce the fee to 1 month's rent or less. And so I'm not going to read off the entire list, but the important highlights here are it starts off with an involuntary change of employment outside the Washington area, the death of the major wage earner in the household, then just straight up unemployment, losing your job, the tenant or the tenant's child being a victim of domestic violence, a landlord harassing a tenant or violating privacy rights. I think some of that came up earlier. If the tenant or the tenant's spouse is 62 years of age or older, and then it can't live independently anymore, needs a transition to assisted living, that's another reason. And then if someone's incarcerated, declared mentally incompetent, but then the one is a kind of I don't want to call it a catch-all, but this is where if you want to reach out to us to talk a little further, other reasonable cause beyond the tenant's control. So it's important to know that's in there. If there is something else that is beyond your control, and you can reasonably, make that claim, explain it to the landlord and things, it's worth looking into whether that would fall under that under that provision. And so again, that's not that you can just drop the keys off. You do still need to give 30 days, and then they can still charge a termination fee, but it caps it. And so a lot of times those fees are very high for paying out the rest of the lease. No, it would be that give 30 days notice, they can charge a 1 month rent fee for that. And if those things are not clear in the lease, you don't feel like it's explaining those protections, because again, this is the contents of the lease that should be there, is the part of the law it's in. If that's not there, or if you're in a lease and these things are coming up, and then you're going to your landlord, you're trying to say, I think I'm allowed to terminate here, I need to give you notice. If you're getting pushback on that, again, please reach out, or if you need to, this would also fall under the ULTA, the landlord-tenant purview, if you needed to file a complaint about that. And I did want to the complaint thing, maybe want to uplift something I heard earlier too, because I really appreciated an early question we had about, the code inspector said, give it 30 days and see if they fix it. And this tenant just knew that wasn't going to happen. I think we talked to a lot of people in that situation, that it's like, I know that it's not going to happen. We understand, and there's reasons to still go through that, just like contacting your landlord first, seeing what they say, going to the proper part of the agency, bringing your complaint, and then letting us know if you think that what they're telling you is unreasonable. We want to hear that, but there also will just have to be, they have to follow their procedure, and they'll have to give a chance for a response. And if you want to set up getting a real resolution and further action, a lot of times there are just those steps that need to get taken. So if you're wondering whether this is one of those, like, do I need to take these steps, and where will that lead? Again, that's why we're here. So please reach out.
So I want to emphasize something also, that if there's a medical reason that you can no longer live in your apartment, that would also be a reason beyond your control. So if you're graduating to a assisted living or a nursing home based on a doctor's recommendation, that would also be something beyond your control. And as David said, it has to be an issue beyond your control. If you decide to buy a house and move, that's not the same thing. If you decide to take another job in another part of the country, that's a choice that you're making, versus being told you're going to have to move out of the county to another state or lose your job. So that would be something that's forced beyond your control. So keep those operating principles in mind. And also, most important, do not do any of this unilaterally. Everything needs to be done in writing, and be careful. You don't want to say, look, I'm leaving, here's 30 days, here's my keys, goodbye. You want to make sure that it's clearly understood with your property manager and landlord that because of a reason that's beyond your control, you're going to need to break the lease, and you need to have the property management or the landlord in writing, show that they understand that and they agree to that. And if they don't, or if there's some kind of confusion, obviously you can reach out to the Renters Alliance. We can help guide you through that, but also ultimately, it needs to go to the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs to ensure that the property staff or the landlord understands that you have a right to break the lease because of an issue beyond your control. Any questions for us on that issue? Or for that matter, the Tenants Association issue? If not, then we'll go to Tim, who has a cheat sheet because Sharon already provided that once. So let's do it again. Tim, on what is required when you get a renewal notice?
Yeah, so what's required is that they have to offer at least a 2-year lease. They can't offer less if you both agree to it, but at the very least they have to offer a 2-year lease. Now the landlord can submit an exemption to the to DHCA, but this is something that they would have to submit. Now keep in mind they don't have to offer you a lease renewal. It might be advantageous to not have a renewal, but it also comes with disadvantages, right? So if you are, let's say your lease ends, you go to month, and that means that your original terms and conditions of your lease still apply. And they, so you can leave with notice, within 2 months, but you can also be evicted without any reason, because we don't have just cause eviction in Maryland with a 2-month notice. So that's that's what happens if you go month to month. But yeah, other than that, there are some exceptions where landlords don't have to provide you with a 2-year lease renewal. If you're in a rental unit that is in a common ownership community, and there's an applicable legal restriction that prohibits a 2-year lease. If you're in an ADU or accessory dwelling unit, like if you're in let's say you're renting someone's mother or in-law unit, that wouldn't apply. A mobile home also doesn't have the this requirement, or an individual living unit. So some of these terms are a little bit legalese, and even us, we're not lawyers. So if you ever have any questions, you can contact the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs, which has been linked somewhere in the chat, or call 311. Let's see, let's just kind of check if there's anything else that I'm missing. And you can find this information in the Landlord Tenant Handbook or section 29 and 27 of the county code.
Tim, can you look up which page on the Landlord Tenant Handbook in case people want to go there?
Yeah, page 12.
Page 12, Landlord Tenant Handbook. We have the handbook link, and there it is. Lickety split. Want to emphasize a couple things. If you get a renewal notice for an extension of a year or 2 or whatever, it has to be 90 days prospective. So your rent cannot go, they can't give you a rent increase without giving you 90 days prospective notice of that. If they're not going to renew the lease, they have to give you 60 days notice. As Tim points out, unfortunately, we don't have good cause or just cause eviction law. We're working very hard to get that passed. But until it is, a landlord can determine not to renew your lease. And if they decide not to renew your lease, you have they have to give you at least 60 days notice to let you know that they're not going to renew the lease. And if you stay 1 day longer than the lease allows, you're what's called tenant holding over, and the landlord can evict you on that basis. And it is a very terrible situation for renters across the state of Maryland to be that vulnerable to a landlord. The landlord does not have to state a reason why they're doing this. And of course, just cause or good cause eviction would require them to state a justifiable reason not to renew the lease. Tim also pointed out that if they do not renew your lease, but they also don't give you 60 days notice that they want you to move out, then your lease goes automatically month to month. That's state law. So the same lease applies, it just only has a month-to-month term. Okay? Now, the only exemptions to the 2-year rule of being offered a 2-year lease is if you live in that we know of, is if you have to have an annual financial certification. So you live in an apartment community that is receives a federal subsidy, other legal relationship to the government, that they have to do a financial certification each year. The Department of Housing and Community Affairs has allowed them to be exempt from offering a 2-year lease. The Renters Alliance disagrees with this, but that is what the Department of Housing and Community Affairs has stated is their policy. Any other questions for Tim, Emily, or David, or myself on the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs?
Matt, there's a question in the chat from someone who is Tenants Association president at their building. And they're saying that like basically management is asking them for some kind of proof that the Tenants Association actually exists. And of course the tenants are scared about providing their names and fearing retaliation. So I told this person that they're not required to give the names, but I guess they're looking for some advice on how they can deal with property management and the pushback on them forming the tenants association. They want to know if they should file a complaint with landlord tenant or what exactly they need to communicate to management to get them to back off their association.
Right. The associations, first of all, take all different forms. Now, 1 or 2 tenants can form a tenants association. If there's multiple tenants associations in the building, that creates some complications. We haven't seen that. So any tenant can go down and say, I want to organize a tenants association. And if they're the first and only in the building, that in and of itself is not a right that can be denied. And you don't have to provide any proof of it. You want to use the room to form a tenants association. I suppose that a property manager could say, what you're really trying to do is sell Tupperware, and I don't believe you, and you're using the room, the rights of tenants associations to do something other than that. Well, they're going to have to prove that, and they'd have to sue you or whatever, to do that. Otherwise, I think that the best approach is to educate them about what the law allows and what your rights are. And if they object to that, then the Renters Alliance can certainly help. And then if it becomes more serious, we'll seek the assistance of the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs to enforce that law. But bear in mind, tenants associations don't have to be registered. You don't have to have everybody in the building. You don't have to have anybody. It could be just yourself and hopefully somebody else who are leading the community in seeking a better quality of life and better relations with the property management and so on. Hopefully, it'll involve more than that, but it is not unusual for tenants associations to represent a small group of the entire population of residents in a building. Efforts should always be made to include everybody in the building, but don't feel that, and don't be told by a property management, you have to show us a registered list of property people in the tenants associations in order to make it valid. You do not. I did see a question in the chat about surveillance in public areas. You are entitled to have a ring on your door if you want to have that, but you're not entitled to put up cameras or listening devices in the common areas. I've never heard of a property management or landlord that would allow that from a tenant. The flip side is I do believe that property management, if they so choose, could put up cameras in the common areas, in the hallways, in the elevators, and in the community spaces. And we've seen that in a number of properties, and they will claim that it's for security and your protection. And I do believe that they're allowed to do that. Any other questions? If not, then let's move on to a couple other things. First of all, I want to thank Sharon Wilkerson and Paulina Melvin from the Office of Rent Stabilization and Kay Williams from Code Enforcement, and I wish Nicole Katravanis a quick and speedy recovery from whatever she's suffering from. And I know she would have been here if she could have been. and I hope we did do justice for what the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs does. But if we have left anything out, we urge you to go online to the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, to the Renters Services link, which we can also add to the chat, has all information about all of these departments and so on. And of course, to read the Landlord Tenant Handbook, which is online and updated as new information becomes available. David, can you walk us through the Access to Counsel and Evictions program, which the Renters Alliance also promotes?
Right. To just jump to the state level for a minute, this is a program that the state legislature and governor decided to create and fund that provides attorneys in housing court for folks who are facing eviction and their income is below a certain level. The law is clear that it's required that you have a chance at least to find counsel, and the way they're doing that is they're putting them down there day of for same day representation. So if you're down at the Rockville District Court, that there's three organizations that cover Montgomery County. One of them is not staffed right now. So I believe they're only there in the mornings some days, but most of the failure to pay rent dockets, there will be someone either from CASA or Maryland Legal Aid attorneys there that you can talk to beforehand. Sometimes they can same day represent, sometimes they get a continuance so they can work with you. But if you call 211 beforehand, if you've been summoned to court, and even before the date you want to call 211, then they'll connect you with one of those organizations for an intake. Good to call ahead if you can, but do look for them down there if you haven't. And yeah, please follow up with us on that if you have questions about whether it's worth reaching out or just the posture of your case. To be honest, it's hard to tell exactly, if there's a notice of intent to go to court that the landlord's required to give you first. A lot of people think that starts the court process, but no, luckily there's an extra warning they have to give you first. We refer to it as a 10-day notice sometimes. If you're confused about whether it's that or an actual court date, things like that, please reach out. But once you do have a court date, that program exists for representation.
And we urge you to get in touch with the Access to Counsel and Evictions program by calling 211 as soon as possible. We also urge you and remind you, do not miss a court date. If you have a case to defend yourself, you will not be able to do it if you miss the court case. The judge will make a judgment against you no matter how defensible your case is. A lawyer might also be able to advise you in ways to delay an eviction if you have to move for some reason. So please take advantage of that program. And by all means, reach out to us if you have any questions about whether it's appropriate for you to reach out to that program in the first place. Our next Renter Town Hall will be July 2nd. We are going to look to have a discussion with the leaders of the effort to pass rent stabilization in Rockville. And of course, other information for another lively and informative conversation on issues important to renters in the Montgomery County region. So to everybody, again, thank you to our guests. Thank you to our staff. This has been a great discussion and very important. It is on YouTube if you've missed any part of it. So please go there if there's a part of the discussion that you want to review. And of course, contact us at info@rentersalliance.org or at our telephone number 888-668-7717. So with that, hope everybody's enjoying this lovely weather, and hopefully it's going to go up and be sunny and summer-like very soon. So with that, thank you everybody and good night.
Thank you.